So if we could do a quick around the Zoom wheel and introduce ourselves. My name is Bev Merrill. I work at Welcome House in Covington, and I represent urban homelessness.
I'll go next. My name is Kay McAfee. I'm Housing Policy and Program Administrator here at KHC. Some of the guests today have been speaking with me for today's call, so thank you. Thank you for being here.
Christina Espinosa
is now joining.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Cassie Hudson. I'm the Executive Director of Partnership Housing located in Owsley County.
This is David Allgood. I'm with the Center for Accessible Living in Louisville, Kentucky.
I'm Mary Crowley-Schmidt with the Bluegrass Area Agency on Aging and Independent Living.
I'm Brewer, proxy for Secretary Rebecca Goodman of the Energy and Environment Cabinet.
I'm Phyllis Parker, and I represent persons with disabilities.
Christina Espinosa with the Human Development Institute.
I'm Brian Perry I'm here for Commissioner Glass, Department of Education.
Hello, my name is Marilyn Clark. I'm the Supply Diversity Manager here at the University of Kentucky, and thank you for having me.
Well, someone chimed in that they're having issues with their microphone. It went by too fast. Let's see.
My name's
Craig Brock. Sorry.
Logan Haynes is having issues with his microphone, so I guess everybody sees that he's the director of the Kentucky Manufactured Housing Institute.
Kathy Figglestaller, representing Commissioner Keene at the Department for Local Government.
Craig Brock, representing Bell Whitley in Pineville, Kentucky.
Rob Jones, represent Audubon Area Community Services in Owensboro, Kentucky.
I'm Kelly Reynolds with Kentucky Housing.
Anyone else?
Dean Loring, Kentucky Transportation Cabinet.
All right.
Buddy Kittle, representing Mortgage Bankers Association of Kentucky.
Mike Turner, Housing Authority of Burkesville.
Carla Hale, Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Winston Miller, Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Lauren Van Sickle, Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Anyone else?
Olivia McCowan,
this is Adrian.
Home Builders Association of Kentucky. Christina Espinosa.
Hi, this is Adrian Bush, Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky.
Patrick Bowen, Bowen National Research. I'm one of your speakers today.
Welcome.
Thank you.
This is Tiffany Marthaler with the Kentucky Affordable Housing Coalition.
Debbie Dennison, Deputy Executive Director of the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board, and I'm joined today by presenter Lori Ulrich.
Welcome. All right, I think that's it. We have quite a crowd today. Our next agenda item is a new item that we'll be doing for every meeting. So at this time, I wanted to see if anyone who's not a committee member, but is here from, the general public had an issue that they wanted to raise and speak on. So now we need to review a few reports and minutes. So if everyone has had time to review the HPAC annual report, if you haven't reviewed it, you probably don't have time to do it now. So if I had a motion from someone to approve that annual report.
This is Cassie Hudson. I'll make a motion.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
This is Wilma Kelly. I'll second it.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor of accepting the annual report, please say aye.
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 All right, thank you. And then we have 2 sets of minutes to approve for this meeting. In January, we didn't have a quorum. So we just need to officially approve those minutes. So I'll entertain 2 separate motions. First, a motion to approve the minutes for the January 24th meeting.
This is David Allgood. I'll make that motion.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Christina Espinosa.
All right. Carla, did you get somebody for that?
No, I didn't get that one. If they can repeat, please. I have David, but I don't have who seconded it.
Craig Brock, I'll second.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. And now for the April 25th meeting. If I could have someone entertain a motion to, or someone could motion to approve those minutes.
It's Christina Espinosa. Motion to approve the most recent April 15 minutes.
Thank you. And a second?
Mary Crowley Schmidt, I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye.
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 Thank you very much. We've got that over with. So now Kay was going to give us a rural housing trust fund overview.
Bev, I wanted to mention to you, I believe we had one new member, Commissioner Glass.
You are right. Thank you, Kay, for keeping me on track. Sorry. So I must confess, I printed these minutes out right before we got started. Could you please introduce yourself? And here it is. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jason Glass, who is the Commissioner of Education for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And he has served as the District Superintendent with Jeffco Public Schools and Eagle County Schools in Colorado. He was Iowa's Chief State School Officer from 2010 to 2013 and has also served as Senior Director of Human Capital Strategy with Battelle for Kids in Ohio. He's held a leadership role in an early childhood education nonprofit in Denver and has held several posts with the Colorado Department of Education. He worked as a university instructor and a high school instructor in Kentucky. So we welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bev. I'll take just a few minutes. This is kind of a high-level brief overview. I believe last session we had touched on the funds coming to KHC for the Rural Housing Trust Fund. And so I want to take a moment to recap at a high level overview that funding opportunity. So again, established in March 2023 out of House Bill 360, this legislation was just issued, $20 million being transferred from the state's really rainy day fund, referred to as SAFE funding. That is $20 million that'll be allocated for Western and Eastern Kentucky, $10 million for Eastern, $10 million for Western. This allocation is, again, created to invest in rural housing solutions. We wanted to provide an update on this funding. So just as recently as June 13th, KHC has worked to appoint and, based on the mandated legislation, composed an advisory committee of 11 members. These members will serve 3-year terms, and the committee will consult and advise KHC officers and directors regarding program directives. Again, this is an advisory committee that really mirrors what is currently the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. However, they are separate advisory committees and separate sources of funds. So I hope that makes sense. The Rural Housing Trust Fund is currently a one-time funding. And again, its priorities are really deemed on the declared disaster areas in Western and Eastern Kentucky. This slide, again, outlines those Rural Housing Trust Fund priorities. And again, these are priorities set forth directly from legislation. So projects located in federally declared disaster areas, projects submitted by nonprofits or local governments, projects using existing privately owned housing stocks, projects using existing publicly owned housing stocks, and projects submitted again by local governments or projects that demonstrate effective zoning, conversion, demolition, and controls. This next slide will again show an overview of those eligible areas and counties. In May 2023, KHC held webinars with their housing nonprofits and multifamily developers across the state. Again, looking at designs and programs that will prioritize these counties and federally declared disaster areas. This slide really shows, again, those counties and that we are using the definition of rural from the USDA property eligibility lookup. So whenever we're getting questions about the areas and where specifically what areas are eligible and what are not, because some of them are kind of on the line there. We're using that USDA lookup. Just as recent as yesterday in the KHC e-grams, many of you have probably received information on the release of this NOFA. So again, we have been very responsive with legislation just coming out in May, already appointing and comprising an 11-member board, and now here in July, getting funds out the door to partners in the release of our new NOFA. So this outline shows that what we will have is 2 eligible rounds. So as long as there is funding available, KHC has just recently released 1 round of funding. That application will close September 1st, and announcements will be made as early as October. So this first round of funding is really for eligible projects that are ready to get funds out the door, and they're ready to proceed. As long as funds remain available, there will be a second round of funding. And again, that will be released in September. The application closes in October, and we're on target to make announcements about these awards in mid-December. So again, this is really the timeline that has been announced just yesterday for the notice of funds available for the Rural Housing Trust Fund dollars. There will be an informational on the 27th. You feel free to sign up and register and hear more about this NOFA. But again, this is a very quick timeline, a very quick turnaround. So again, legislation coming out just in March, the committee being comprised by June, and the NOFA funding, notice of available funds getting out already in July. The Rural Housing Trust Fund Committee will reconvene November 1st. And so they will get a report out on that round one of funding and look at, what is still available, what projects have been proposed. Another question that we've had is just, where does this funding fall with the disaster recovery dollars? This is really meant to be a bridge, right, to fill the gap so that partners and projects are able to get funds until we know more about the CDBG DR funds that are coming to Kentucky and we have a better timeline. So that's all the information that I have today just about the Rural Housing Trust Fund. We look to provide you more updates in the future. The committee will reconvene November 1st. And that concludes this portion of the agenda, Bev.
Thank you, Kay. Are there any questions about this or comments?
Hi, this is Rob Jones. I was just kind of curious what type of projects you all are looking for this money.
Well, again, with some of the priorities right now, what they're looking at is funding really for home repair, recovery, and reconstruction as part of the program, housing solutions for disaster survivors, and then single family home buyer development, which will be new homes that will prioritize disaster survivors, but are not exclusive to survivors. There will be more information and detail on the 27th. If you have not received that information via eGram, reach out to me directly. I'm happy to forward it to you. Kelly Reynolds' team will be providing a lot of detail about the funding. They will revisit this timeline and they will talk more about the priorities and the scoring at that time. I hope that helps. Rob, thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. So the next couple of topics on our agenda are related to looking at our focus areas that we've identified for the coming year. And just to remind everyone, we did kind of a brainstorming session and came up with 3 focus areas of increasing our housing supply, disaster preparedness and resiliency, and addressing barriers to home ownership. And so one of the thoughts that came out of the last meeting was looking at housing and its impact on economic development, that the two are really pretty intertwined. And so we wanted to have some presenters who could speak to us about that. So next we have Patrick Bowen, who's going to talk about the impact of housing on the economy. So thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Bev. I assume you're controlling the PowerPoint or somebody there is?
Yes, I got you covered, Patrick.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead to the next slide. Thanks for having me again, Patrick Bowen, president of Bowen National Research. We're an Ohio-based real estate research firm, but we do work all over the United States, in all 50 states. And most of the studies that we do are site-specific market feasibility studies. We do over 500 of those a year. We've done a lot of work in your state, over 150 studies. We also do housing needs assessments, and I'll share a little bit of that with you here today. But we study, cities or counties or regions and evaluate a lot of different things, demographics, economic, and then housing to address, what their current housing situation is, and then where are they heading as a community and how can they plan for those changes. So we've done a lot of work in Kentucky. We've done 4 housing needs assessments in your state, and we're currently doing one down in Bowling Green, and hope to do some more in your state. So what I thought I would do, if you go to the next slide, is I'll share one of the pieces that we do within our housing needs assessment. So we study a lot of different things, but one of the things that we collect during our research is, this has actually been more of a recent thing we've done since COVID, and that is surveys of employers. So over the last 2 years, we've done 14 different surveys within communities around, most of these are east of the Mississippi. In fact, I think I listed them there at the bottom, within Kentucky, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And we did these surveys where we collected information on over 450 different employers. And we asked them a series of questions about their businesses and where they, what kind of businesses they have, and size of the companies and things like that. But what I'm going to share here today with you, I've only shared once before, and this is where we pulled all these surveys together. Because if you keep in mind, when we typically present a study, I'm talking to an individual community about their employers or their residents and their demographics and their housing. But what I thought I'd do a couple weeks ago was to pull something together that kind of aggregates, what am I learning more on a national scale to find out what employers are saying. So I'm going to share some of those with you today. So one of the things we ask is housing impacting your business? And more than 55% of the employers are saying yes. So in some capacity, housing is adversely impacting my business. Go to the next slide. All right, so then we ask, well, how? How is it impacting you? And so a lot of this stuff wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, employers are telling us, company morale, adding to their cost, limiting their growth. But the bottom two are the bigger ones that I think was probably the point that I wanted to make with this, and that is employers are having a tough time retaining their workers. Over 42% are telling us that housing is doing that to them. And then attracting workers, 64%. So almost 2/3 of the employers are really having a challenge of attracting workers. And we've heard that all over the place. And I suspect there's some people on this video call today that are either experiencing it firsthand or hearing from others that folks are having a tough time attracting workers. And part of that obviously is tied to labor force issues. But a big part of it, clearly here, employers are telling us housing is playing a role in their ability to attract workers. Next slide, please. So again, these slides are getting distorted a little bit since I've given them to you, so I'm not sure what happened. But most common housing issues that employers are telling us the employees are facing, the top two, housing availability and rental affordability. And here's the thing, when we survey, because we also, I didn't put this in here today, but we also survey residents and commuters, and we ask them a series of questions of what are they facing in terms of housing issues, and those are also the top two issues for them. It's housing availability and housing affordability, whether it's rental or even home buying affordability. So again, employers are saying their employees are facing these challenges. Next slide. All right, so now let's get into, again, some stuff has happened to my presentation since I gave it to you. So when we asked them, okay, if housing was not an issue and that local housing issues could be solved, what is the likelihood that you would hire more employees? And so 2/3 of those that responded either said somewhat likely or much more likely that they would hire additional employees. So as you all think, I don't know the entire scope of all the goals that your organization has and avenues that you take, but if I were in the role of trying to convince decision makers of why housing should be important or why it is important, this would be one of those things to link housing to the employer's not just current viability, but what's the potential. And a lot of these, and I don't have the data in this presentation, but when we do these surveys, we ask employers a specific question. Okay, if you were to hire more, how many more? And sometimes it's not very many jobs, but if we get enough surveys in some communities, you're talking, even if it's like 10 larger employers, this could be several hundred employees within a community that be adding more, would be more jobs created if housing issues weren't existing. So clearly there's a link between economic growth and viability of businesses tied to housing. Next slide. All right, so then we asked the question, if you were going to consider any type of housing assistance, and man, this really got distorted. What kind of assistance would you consider? And so many of these weren't really big surprises. They mentioned rental security deposits. If you skip the second one, because I want to talk about that in a second, but other things like housing relocation reimbursement, housing relocation services and assistance, housing counseling and placement service, nothing surprising there. When we asked the question, would you even want to have any type of housing assistance or be involved with housing? The typical answer is about 25% of employers will say, yes, in some way I want to do something. But if you look at that second answer there, that's the one that's really new to us, and it's been really post-COVID. And that is employers actually telling us, I want to be involved with solving the issue directly in the sense of, I'll partner with somebody in development of housing, or I'll go on my own if I could just get somebody to take me through the hurdles and help us through that. So the point is, there are employers that are poised to do something. So again, I think as an organization, as you think forward, and maybe you've already had these conversations, maybe you've already thought of that, but I just want to throw this out there for at least further dialogue, and that is bring employers to the table, bring economic development people into the conversation, because I do think a lot of communities, if you get down to like the local levels, whether it's a city or a county, I don't think they're thinking about employers being part of the solution. And I can give you example after example, whether it's smaller communities or even bigger cities. I'm just outside of Columbus, Ohio. I mean, here, Children's Hospital has done phenomenal work in turning around their neighborhood in terms of reinvestment and redevelopment of housing around the hospital. But there's examples all over the country where employers are proactive in it. So again, I would just throw that out there to be thinking about, let's get employers involved with this, because everybody on this call knows the challenge of housing is daunting, right? And if anybody thinks the government's going to solve this, or private developers or nonprofit or any individual group's going to do that, they've underestimated the challenge. And so you all know that, but I'm just saying another group that needs to be part of that conversation is employers. I'll jump off my soapbox there. Next slide. And so we asked employers about policies and what do they think is important. And the green is those that are saying these are the most important items to them. And the one that stood out was employers saying, look, any kind of housing policy tied to encouraging new development or redevelopment is really a high importance to them. And the other ones that came back was, renter assistance or home buyer assistance, even public housing or other items. But developers are obviously, they understand we really need to have more housing, particularly workforce housing, and policy should be driven towards supporting those efforts. Next slide. All right, so I've got a few slides here. I have 5 different areas of Kentucky I wanted to share with you. I'm going to do this one, and again, my slide has been distorted here. In fact, let me pull up my hard copy so I can read the numbers correctly. But so what you're going to see on this one, I'll do this one slow, but then the rest I'll go through real fast so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is Kenton County. So this is up near the Cincinnati, the Covington area. And so part of this is cut off. And it's at the very top, says typical housing costs, Kenton County, fair market rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,093. Below that I had, again, it's cut off. It's the median list price in May of 2023, $292,000. So use these, we use these as a general guide to say what's a typical rental for this area and what is a typical home price for a home that's listed on the market. So again, $1,000 roughly for 2-bedroom and over $292,000 for a for-sale home. Back up 1 second, please. All right, so on this table, if we go across, these are the most common jobs for the Cincinnati MSA, which again grabs the Covington area. And so we list the jobs, we list the lower quartile of wages for that worker, we list the median, and then we do the corresponding, what does that worker, what could they afford in terms of rent, if they were at the lower quartile wage, or what they could afford at the median wage. Same thing for home buying. What could they purchase, the maximum purchase price? So for a retail salesperson, lower quartile wage is $23,000, median's $29,000. They can afford a rent of $594 or $729, depending on if it's the lower quartile or median. And for home buying, $79,000 or $97,000. Anything you see in red is basically indicating to you that those workers at those wages cannot afford to rent or buy in this area, with the exception of a very few, right? You got the sales reps, you got whether it's wholesale or services, and first line supervisors, heavy tractor trailer drivers, workers like that. But the majority of your jobs, these workers, again, these aren't selected by Bowen. These are the 30, and there's more on the next page, but these are the 30 top jobs for this area in terms of number of jobs. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And this is the rest of Kenton County, again, finishing off those top 30 jobs. A little bit less red here, but still majority of it is red. So your teachers in this area can afford a rental, whether it's a secondary school or elementary school teachers, nurses, registered nurses, and then some of the other occupations. But one of the things that you get from this is, for many of these jobs, who are the ones that can afford rentals, and virtually nobody can afford to buy. But who can afford the rentals? That's somebody that has a degree, college degree, or some kind of a certification, or their middle to upper management position. So for the most of the blue collar workers, they can't afford to rent and definitely can't afford to buy. Now there's a caveat to all these that I'm showing you here, and that is this is one wage, right? This is a single wage earner. But what it is telling you is you better have another job, or you better have a second wage earner in your house. And so while I will acknowledge this is only a single person wage analysis, and many people do have a second job or second income earner in their household, the point is you do have to have that. In some cases, that second wage earner better have something close to the first wage earner in terms of the wages that they earn. So anyway, affordability tied to these jobs, you can see the disconnect. Next slide. And now these will go faster. This is Warren County. So it's the Bowling Green area, fair market rent of $941. Look at the median list price of what's available, $349. And therefore you can see, again, most common jobs in that Bowling Green area, they cannot afford to rent. They cannot afford to buy. Next slide, please. Additional jobs, this is that same area. And with few exceptions, again, some of the teachers, registered nurses, general occupation or operations managers, they can afford a rent, but most others cannot. And again, nobody can afford to reasonably purchase a home. Next slide. So no shock here. Again, another one. This is the Lexington area. Lots of red. Red is bad. Very, very few rents in the black and no for sale housing in the black. Next slide, please. Rest of the jobs in the Fayette County area, a little bit more affordable for some of these jobs. And again, I apologize that the tables and things have been distorted since I sent these, so I don't want that to be a reflection of me. But again, the stuff is not affordable. And these are your common jobs. Next slide. How about Owensboro, Kentucky area? A lot of red. Can't rent, can't buy. This is your workforce. Next slide. This is the rest of that area. A few more jobs in there that can afford rentals, but again, nobody can afford to buy. And then the last two I got here, go ahead to the next slide. This is Rowan County. So this is over in Moorhead, Kentucky, so the northeastern part of the state, for which we did their housing needs assessment. In fact, I think three of the areas that we've shown you, we've done that area's housing needs assessments at some point in the past. So we did Rowan County's study this past year. And so I figured it's a good representation of Eastern Kentucky, kind of a more rural market of the state. And it's no different, right? It's again, the wages matched up to what people can afford to what is being charged in terms of the rents. Again, fair market rent's been cut off on this one, just to give you a reference point so you can know what it's like over there. 770. That's not a real high rent for probably a lot of people on this call. 770 would seem somewhat reasonable. Look at all the red on there. That's still, these wages, you can't even afford a $770 rent. Home prices there. This is available list price, $265. So a little bit more reasonable than some of the other areas, but it's all red in terms of what people can afford. Next slide. That's the last one I've got for you. Some jobs in Rowan County, some people can afford to rent, but most cannot. And again, nobody can afford to buy on their own. You do have to have a second job or a second wage earner in the house. So the whole point of this, that's my last slide. One of the things that, our company does a lot of different types of studies in terms of real estate development. And it's really been in the last 2 years, we've seen this growing interest of employers say, or at least tell us the challenges they're facing with housing and what it's doing to their companies and how it's holding them back. But then to illustrate the disconnect between the wages people earn and what they can afford, and then what's available, or at least what is reasonably priced in this market. One of the things this ignores, but it's a critical piece, and I'll leave this as my last thought, is when we study communities, one of the things we dig quite deeply in is what's available, right? I didn't cover that here. And so even if somebody, like on this last slide, elementary school teachers, all right, you can afford a rent of $11.93. We studied that Rowan County area. I can tell you there are almost no rentals over there at that price that are available. Availability is a problem, and I suspect everybody on this call knows that, particularly for the affordable side, right? You all know government subsidized, it's full, there's wait list, tax credit, it's almost always full, long wait list. But one of the things people are ignoring is the market rate side. They think, well, okay, market rate probably has some availability. Nope, I'm telling you folks, we survey market after market around the country. Unless it's super high-end stuff that it's over $2,000 in some of these markets around the country, maybe you've got some vacancies there. But we're in a world today, and that includes Kentucky, where $1,600 rents are now considered affordable, or at least perceived as affordable market rate. And you've seen all these examples across your state, whether I take some of the bigger cities or I take a rural market. No, there's very few jobs out there that can afford a $1,600 rent. So, but you throw in the fact that there's very little available across the board, whether it's market rate, tax credit, or government subsidized. Like the employers told us, like the residents tell us, availability and affordability are their challenges, and the data that we keep finding over and over, not just Kentucky, around the country, it's just repeating the same story, that those are the two core issues that ultimately get back to the local economy. So I'll leave it with that. I don't know if you wanted to have a quick moment for any questions or you want to move on, but Bev, I'll turn it back to you. And thanks for having me, by the way.
Oh, thank you. This was really interesting. So maybe at this point, if there were just any clarification questions, and maybe we can hold a more full discussion after the next two programs. So our presenters, does anyone have any clarification questions they wanted to ask? All right, well, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Debbie Dennison with Work Ready Communities in Kentucky.
Good afternoon, everyone, and appreciate you having us. This is actually a dual presentation. Lori is she's our vice chair. I am with the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board. We are an advisory board to the governor on all things workforce. So the workforce system, workforce participation. As you heard from our friend, Mr. Bowman, we've got some challenges right now. And some of the things that we do in our committee work, in our work groups, is to look at barriers, work with communities, and see how best to tackle really at a local level. And Mr. Bowman is absolutely correct. Not one organization can do this on their own. It is always a collaboration of individuals that come together and utilize resources. Our 40-person board right now is an employer-led board, which is mandated by the Department of Labor to be, but we also include folks like Goodwill, the Kentucky Chamber. We have a senator, a legislator representation. We have a local judge executive, a mayor. So we've got a variety of folks. We also have educators on there. We have a variety of folks that are looking at these barriers for folks to enter the workforce, to have sustainable and living wages. And Mr. Bowman also touched on something. Employers are at the heart of really making this happen. A little bit of what Lori will discuss in a while is recent work that she and her committee have done in working with economic development and really looking at what we need to look at going forward. But, we're just grateful to be here today. We're also grateful to Mr. Miller and to Kay McAfee for their participation in our committees, in our work groups, as we all try to identify all of these barriers that include transportation, childcare, the sustainable wages, all of these things that post-COVID has really put in our sights. I might add some links to the chat as Lori is talking through some of the things she's working on. But I also want to leave you all with, this is a state planning year, meaning the Department of Labor requires every state to produce a 4-year plan on workforce development, workforce investment, trying to take our existing programs and making them better, better aligning them to the needs of not only today, but what 4 years is going to look like from now. So the conversation is very timely to be having around housing in our world, and our worlds definitely connect and collaborate. So again, I'm grateful for you to have us here. Lori Ulrich is our vice chair of the KWIB, the State Workforce Development Board, and she comes actually from Rowan County. So it was interesting to hear that information. But we are happy to have her, and she's going to speak a little bit about work-ready communities and what does that mean now and what that might look like going towards the future. So thank you again for having us. Lori?
Yes, I echo that sentiment, Debbie. Thank you so much for inviting us and allowing us to share with you. And Mr. Bowman, it's interesting that you reference Rowan County because as Debbie alluded to, our board, our business leaders, many folks that are on that board are involved in the community. And so my day job, what I really do is I work for a utility. And that utility covers an 8-county territory, and Rowan County is one of those counties. So I can attest to you that when we are recruiting business and industry to come into Rowan County, one of the big things, just like Mason or Fleming or Bath or any of the other counties that we deal with, one of the big questions that we get is, where are people going to live? That is very important. So, those are the things that we are dealing with, I think, post-COVID. The work-ready community, I don't know how many of you folks are familiar with that, but that is a credentialing system that we've had in place for many years now. I believe it was initially brought forth by some folks at the Economic Development Cabinet in the state of Kentucky. And it has had 3 levels. It has had work ready, which if you meet all of the criteria, there is work ready in progress, meaning you've met some of the criteria and you're moving toward or have a plan to move forward in the other elements. And of course, there's a letter of intent, and that individual county just says to us that we intend to start this process. So that is how it has worked thus far. We've had some things change, as we all know, through COVID. There's been some growing pains, if you will, in business and industry. We've had to learn and adapt new ways of doing business. I think we all would agree COVID has really changed our world. And one of the things that we discovered as a committee, as we were going through the credentialing process and talking about how can we make this process more relevant to counties or communities in the state of Kentucky, one of the things that keeps coming up is, quite honestly, barriers. What are the things that are keeping individuals out of the workforce? It could be transportation. And I will use my area for an example. Right now I'm taking this conference call in Maysville. If you're familiar with Maysville, it's along the Ohio River. Maysville does have public transportation, but that public transportation stops at 5 p.m. So what about the individual that wants to work a second shift or a third shift and they don't have a vehicle? So that is a barrier, obviously. Childcare. How many individuals, and in particularly women, have left the workforce since COVID? When our children were sent home to be educated, obviously someone needed to be at home with them. So it changed. And many of our child care institutions either shuttered, they closed, and they didn't come back after COVID. It's just difficult. And we see barriers, particularly in rural communities. I can speak to that and say it's very difficult for the women that I work with in my company to find reliable child care, maybe for extended hours for the individuals that work second shift or again, third shift. How do you make that work? And of course, housing, to Mr. Bowman's point. When you have business and industry growing in certain areas, and again, Rowan County is a prime example, there's quite a few things that are coming into the area. There was recently an announcement about a distillery that's going to be starting there. People are going to want to relocate to that area. So where are they going to live? and who's going to take that project on. So there's just a lot of things that go into this equation, if you will. And Alisher and myself have had the opportunity to talk to some economic development professionals as we were going through this process of potentially revamping the parameters of the Work Ready criteria, and specifically the Work Ready program. We had the opportunity to talk to our friends at KAED, which is the Kentucky Association for Economic Development, and also with a group that is more of a southeastern United States group. And the things that we've been hearing are basically these things. Transportation is an issue for employers. Child care is an issue for employers, and housing. These are all the barriers that are keeping people out of the workforce, are really hindering growth and opportunity in certain regions of the state. And I think the barriers are different depending on whether you're in a rural county like Rowan or whether you're in Fayette. There's still going to be issues no matter where you're at. And as Mr. Bowman has discussed, affordability and being able to buy a home or pay for a rental property when you are working in a service industry job that maybe doesn't pay as well, those are real issues. And so we want to make sure that as we are using the Work Ready program to promote our counties and to promote to business and industry that our folks are truly work ready, we want to incorporate these things in to make sure that we are addressing those barriers so we can get as many folks into the workforce as possible. That's number one, because obviously the more people that are in the workforce that are getting through those barriers, that helps us all, and it helps the Commonwealth grow and become an even stronger state. So Debbie, did I miss anything in the process there?
I don't think so. I know that we're throwing a lot at this group that probably isn't as familiar with what we do, but I know that there's going to be a question and answer time. We certainly have many committee meetings. In the chat, I put a link to our website that has those scheduled committee meetings. Would love for any of you to join to lift up ideas. Again, part of what we do is to convene meetings and make introductions to all of the stakeholders that are involved in our workforce development system, right? And you all are one of those stakeholders. Several people on this call are stakeholders. So anytime you want to join and lift up ideas, please do so. I think, Lori, you did a great job of kind of summarizing where we are with things. Our committee work right now around is a community work ready is revamping. So we are going to have some opportunities later in the year, and I can make sure that Kay has that information really to lift a public voice of what those key indicators of if a community is ready or not should be. So thank you again for having us.
We do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Are there any clarification questions anybody wanted to ask? All right. So our third presenter is Marilyn Clark, presenting on workforce development programs.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those last two presentations were really wonderful because I wear a number of hats here. So I'm going to talk about my supplier diversity role, but I also work in economic development under equitable economic development, and we talk about a number of those key issues. So I will be in touch. I have been here at the University of Kentucky for about 2.5 years when we began our first supplier diversity program. My purpose is to make sure that we are working with including and developing minority women, veteran-owned companies as part of our procurement process. The University of Kentucky has a budget that is approaching $7 billion. We probably run at least 1.4, 1.5 to $2 billion through our procurement services department, which is where I am embedded. And so on a daily basis, I am looking at all of the projects and the contracts and things that we have going out, a little bit like an air traffic controller, trying to make sure that we are ensuring some participation with our minority companies. And in terms of economic development, business ownership, along with housing and investments and financial literacy, are a big part of lifting people from one economic level to another, which I think is extremely important. So talking about the Construction Diversity Accelerator Program, this is a program that we started in 2002. It is through a relationship that we have with Turner Construction. For the last 10 years, Turner has been on our campus building various projects, new and old, renovations and new construction. And so Turner has a program that's been in place for many, many years, since 1969. And we were connected to that program shortly after I started working here through our facilities VP, Mary Bosevich. Next slide. So one of the things that we recognized here is that we have a heavy outpouring of cash in our construction division, which is pretty common, but it's a little bit more than I think I've seen in recent years. Over the next 5 years, UK will probably spend anywhere from $4 to $5 billion on construction. That is a lot of money, and we're having difficult times making sure that we have enough companies, especially enough diverse companies, to work on these projects. And when I say enough companies, I mean across the board. So we are looking across the state, we are looking in other states to make sure that we have enough companies to bid our projects, which is really important. Just like everybody else, we have seen an increase in construction projects simply because of shortages of materials and supplies and supply chain issues. Those have not totally gone away. So one of the things we put together was, if we've got this shortage and we've got this program, let's pull these two ideas together, and we created the Construction Diversity Accelerator. The basis of that program really is around the Turner Project, but we also added some of our own elements to make it very unique. Turner has their program that operates in about 48 markets across the country, but none of them is to the level that we have here in Fayette County. The markets, the businesses that we serve are minority, women, veteran, LGBTQ, and disabled-owned businesses. You can go to the next slide.
Craig Brown.
This will just tell you a little bit more about the Turner program. It's been around since 1969, which, if you think about that, that was a year after Martin Luther King was assassinated and during the Civil Rights Movement. So they've been very forward-thinking in terms of this process, and so we appreciate that. Go to the next slide. Okay, so when we started this program, one of the things that was important was content. So we wanted to make sure that minority businesses had the proper content so that they could be competitive in this industry. And so we were really intentional about bringing that to the forefront. And we want to walk them through everything that happens from the beginning of a process all the way to the end, and understanding how to bid, which is a major barrier for a lot of businesses, not only minority businesses, but businesses in general. And so these are some of the things that are important. I would say understanding site logistics, starting a project, understanding how to read construction drawings and specifications, understanding how to estimate on a project. That has been a really, really big barrier. Understanding scheduling and the software that people use for that, and how to do takeoffs and measuring. And so one of the big parts of this is also understanding procurement. The University of Kentucky is not an easy customer to work for and work with. And so we try to make sure that they understand our bidding process. How do you submit that paperwork? What's important? And what does it look like? What does delivery look like? And so we also have a graduation program, and we have a mock bid presentation that happens before a panel of evaluators. We'll go to the next slide. So our application process is open now for the 2024 group. We have a planning team that goes through a screening process, takes each applicant through a screening process, not applicant, but application. And then after we choose who's going to be in the class, they're required to attend a mandatory online orientation. They are required to attend 7 out of the 9 sessions. And they are required to participate in their team mock bid projects. So this mock bid presentation is at the very end of the program. They actually go through what we call a real pre-bid meeting where they learned about the project. We take them on a bus to a live active construction project. In the beginning, they have to buy their own materials. They have to do their own bid. They have to do their own estimate and mock-ups. And we also have, working with them is a team of mentors. So we have project managers from the University of Kentucky. I would say we have close to 50 volunteers that are working on this program at any given time. Let's go to the next slide. One of the additional things that we added to this program is coaching, business coaching, because we think that that is imperative, not only for us to teach about the construction part of the program, but also for someone to work with those companies on their business, to understand what that looks like, to have a sustainable business. And so the Kentucky Apex Accelerator is a DoD-supported organization that covers the entire state of Kentucky. I think they may have a staff of 7 to 10 people. They fall under KSTC and operate here out of the Lexington office, but they have counselors across the state. And so each one of the participants in the program is assigned a consultant to work with them, and they work with them where they are, meaning wherever that company is, they provide services to get them to the next level and whatever's comfortable for them, whatever speed they're going at. And the great thing about this coaching is that it lasts beyond the end of this particular program. The program is 10 weeks. We meet from 6 to 8 in the evening. It's a huge outlay of time because a lot of them have to travel from some county surrounding Fayette County. So in addition to what they put into the program and what we're giving to them, they also have this other support system to make sure that companies are strong and that they're growing. We keep in touch with them after each cohort. We check to see if they need things, and we also check to see if they're taking advantage of any opportunities. So let's go to the next slide. So we have a number of community partners. I don't even know if you can see that, but community partners operate in a number of roles. One, they help support financially the program, which we don't spend a lot of money, but food is a big expense because they come at night and we want to make sure they have a dinner because they're driving in from work with no time in between and they have to go back home after 8 o'clock. This is where we hold our classes. This is the Esports Theater in Community Cornerstone. It's near on campus. It's a really cool space. So we have the entire innovation space in the theater for our classes. Our community partners include the Bluegrass Airport, Commerce Lexington, Fayette County Public Schools, LFUCG, which is our urban county government, Lynn Imaging, which is our e-commerce house. They host all of our bid activities. So we teach people how to use their software. Messer Construction, the SBA, our UK Economic Development Collaborative, UK Research, UK Purchasing and Supplier Diversity. So these are some of the companies and organizations that help us lift up this particular program because it is a heavy lift in terms of time and resources and money. Next slide. Okay, so one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to be intentionally inclusive. And so all of our expenditures from our catering, for our reception, this is a picture of our reception, and we have a graduation dinner. We have food catered every week, so we used a diverse vendor for that. We use a woman-owned business to buy our things like backpacks and gifts. We use minority-owned businesses for our wooden handcrafted, carved original pieces for the mock bid winners. And so we were very intentional about how we are spending our money and also offer those supports to those businesses as well. Next slide, please. So some of the community impact, we are tracking some of the companies, like we said, over the last 2 years. This last year, we had a company actually go through certification, which I didn't mention, but that's important. We have, over the last 2 years, had 13 contracts been awarded to our CDA graduates, with the majority of those from the University of Kentucky, I'm proud to say. We have had 100% of participation this year in the companies actually getting their capability statements done, which is like a business resume. And that's critically important because we use those to share with other departments and divisions. The Apex Accelerated Consultants track their hours, 110 hours of support. 113 bid opportunities and notices were sent to them. And we had a couple of those companies register with LFUCG through their purchasing software. And so once a quarter, we send out information to our businesses to see if they've received any new contracts or if they need help. And then we also send out things to our community partners to see if they are engaging with the businesses that we are working with. So that's a little bit about our community, our Construction Diversity Accelerator program. We do intend to come back for year 3. Last year, we did receive a $10,000 grant from the Bluegrass Community Foundation, and we will continue to look for forces to funding to lift this program up each year. When we don't have it, we will find it somewhere in my budget so that we can keep it going, because I can see a very big difference that this program can make in building those businesses who are operating in our minority communities who also have some issues. But one of the things I do see is when we have a business that becomes successful, I have some successful businesses that have grown from one person to a full office, they give back. They give back to their communities. They give back to the students in our schools. They give back to their churches. They give back to other smaller businesses. And so we want to create that circle that we are continually investing in businesses and then not dropping them after the process, but giving them support as they grow and develop along the way. So I can answer any questions at the given time. Here's our participation by numbers. This is for the last class, just to show the number of people who work with the program, the number of presenters, and the presenters are coming over mostly from the Cincinnati office for Turner. We have 11, probably even more than that, between presenters and mentors. Those mentors show up every single night for 10 weeks, which is a large amount of time. The number of counselors that come in and out, and the number of community partners that we work with. And then that just shows the breakdown of the diverse group of people that we supported through the program, and also the diverse industries or parts of the construction industry that they represented. Next slide. Okay, so that's our program. We're still tweaking. We're still learning every year. We're still engaging through surveys. Kristen Voltaire from Turner loves QR codes, so we survey to death. And but we actually go back, we listen, and we actually go back and we change. Constantly we change and tweak.
Thank you very much, Marilyn.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Are there any questions right now? All right. Next on the agenda is Kentucky's Weatherization Program. Kelly.
All right. I think we have a couple of slides for you just to do a weatherization report. So here is our update. The nice part about July, August, and September is we seem to just like level off and maintain. So that's a good thing. It's not crazy like the other parts of the year. So this year we have added solar language to our LIHEAP state plan. That went before the LRC committee last week and was a piece of cake. So we will have solar language in the LIHEAP state plan this year, which is pretty exciting. That goes into effect October 1st. What we did is we just picked up solar language from the Colorado state plan and dumped it in the Kentucky plan, because I figure if it's approved in Colorado, it should be approved in Kentucky. So it is for rooftop solar. So we will be looking to braid that with DOE bill dollars to do some rooftop solar projects, just to kind of get our feet a little wet and see how to do that. So our DOE formula state plan was approved in July. We kind of talked about that state plan back at our April meeting. So that was approved in July. Those contracts are out. We get that approved like mid-July. So those contracts went out last week. Our bill projects are underway. That was approved April 3rd, just to refresh your memory. We did go back to public hearing with some little tweaks and changes. Frontier Housing has been named as the subgrantee to take over the territory that was recently vacated by Middle Kentucky. So it's Lee, Owsley, Breathitt, Wolf are the counties. So that's a good thing. We will be getting them, we'll be working to do some onboarding with them to try to get them started, but it's going to take a little while. It's a lot to learn. We are waiting on DOE to approve our changes in our bill state plan for our subgrantees. So that was a couple of subgrantees we added. We added Frontier, and then we had to add CETA, which is a subgrantee out of Illinois who's going to come into the state of Kentucky and help us do multifamily housing. So they'll be doing our multifamily weatherization program until we can get subgrantees trained. We are currently updating our program manual to include bills sections for bills specifically, and then other changes that we have made since the last version was out in 2019. We're evaluating training needs as well. So we're trying to figure out from our network what training needs do they have in their workforce so that we can fill those gaps. We are working on developing a workforce development plan. So some of this meeting has been the presentations have been kind of eye-opening and enlightening to us as we're looking to do workforce development for weatherization as well. And then we are also trying to work to bridge our HTF repair programs and weatherization. I did a little project this morning at the HTF committee meeting on a project that was emergency HTF home repair from the July 2022 flood. And now that the repairs have been made, we had the weatherization partner in that area come and look at that mobile home to do weatherization in it. So it looks like that's going to work out. So not only did she get emergency repairs done, so her house is her mobile home is better placed than it was prior to the flooding, we're also going to start doing weatherization measure installs on that mobile home so that she will lower her utility bills in addition. So it's a nice partnership. We're trying to use that kind of not really as a pilot, but more of a sample to other areas and other subgrantees for weatherization and HTF home repair, that those kind of two programs can work really nicely together. And that's about it. Any questions?
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Bev.
And now we have Kay with KHC updates.
Thanks, Bev. And thanks to Kelly for talking so fast. I was hoping she'd slow down. I'm joking. Just again, last segment, we talked a little bit about a book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, by author Greg Colburn. And so wanted to just revisit that. As an organization, we engaged, about 20-ish of us engaged to read this book first and then have some internal discussions. So Homelessness is a Housing Problem. Author Greg Colburn and Clayton Aldern test a range of conventional beliefs about what drives homelessness. The research in this book demonstrates that housing market conditions such as cost and availability of rental housing explain homelessness. The author recommends a system approach that includes increasing the number of affordable housing units and creating a robust response system. And so the book really talks about a mismatch when you have tight markets and not enough housing availability. It talks about creating a robust response system. So beyond just housing vouchers and development, but it talks about public education and engagement. It talks about interagency partnerships. And so we have done a lot to highlight this book and this author and the work and the research that is presented. Many of you will also know that this author will be attending the KHC annual conference this year. So if you haven't gotten your tickets, please come and attend so that you can meet and share in the discussion, the wider panel discussion with author Greg Colburn. With that internal discussion, so what is now happening? We, again, read this book April and May. We began these internal discussions as far as our program staff and leadership staff throughout our organization. Then with what we learned and read about, we began kind of compiling questions about what we can do internally as far as our investment and our development of programs as an organization. And so in June, we explored some internal and external partnerships and relationships, creating really a feedback loop so that we can consider policy implications and how to start looking at program designs. Just as recently in the last few weeks, again, first reading the book, then talking internally, we began to, with the help of author Greg Colburn, reach out to the Washington Department of Commerce. And so what they have done is they've created a housing planning tool really built around a housing needs assessment model. And so we've been engaging with that agency to talk about the housing needs assessment and the RFP that they put out in 2021. They began searching for a consultant to help them work on a broad-based county-level housing needs assessment. And so we're looking at that model and talking with the Washington Department of Commerce to really explore ways in which we can really mirror that process here in the state of Kentucky. We wanted to take and look across, our state at the county level and understand what are the housing needs and what are the priorities. KHC as a strategic direction we know that our most urgent housing issues are a severe shortage of units, right? And so we want to understand that at every level of income, low, moderate, but also looking at our middle income households. And then, of course, we want to be responsive in our direction to help with the continued disaster recovery that is happening around Eastern and Western Kentucky. And so again, with this information, we are doing some ongoing engagement with existing, but also with new partners. So we're looking at the model that has been used in Washington for the planning for housing in Washington to understand what role does, do the public and working with grassroots organizations and nonprofit and for-profit developers, what role did that play in them determining their methodology for their housing needs assessment and their public engagement strategy for their housing needs assessment. With this information, we are planning as an organization to continue to build and just make awareness, talk about the consensus, and that should take place continuously, probably starting around late fall through the winter, through webinars, conferences, and sessions. So right now in July, again, we are really designing and commissioning, working with the Department of Commerce in DC to learn about the housing needs assessments, understand what role their consultants played in that RFP, and really set goals and prioritization around a development for a housing needs assessment for Kentucky. And so a lot of this was birthed out of, as Bev, you mentioned, we created really pillars and priorities for the Housing Policy Advisory Committee, really wanting to take a look at short-term and long-term strategies. And so when we talked and listened to our nonprofit partners, we developed this list of all the things that we know are at play when it comes to addressing the barriers and the growing housing challenges. Supply shortage, of course, the natural disasters that we have experienced, economic growth, local resistance, not in my backyard, the impacts on equity and fair housing, slow delivery of units to market. I believe Marilyn just talked today about that. And then stagnant funding landscape. Our advocacy partners have talked a lot about funding and making funding more flexible. And so again, we want to continue to be responsive to that. Even in the presentation today, Patrick spoke again about employers talking about the top two common issues being, again, housing availability and housing affordability for rental and buyers, just as what's on the list. And then 2/3 of employers having trouble retaining and attracting workers, again, because we have a severe shortage of units. So we know that all these factors are at play. Our role, again, is going to be focusing on a housing needs assessment for the state of Kentucky. And so shortly, again, how are we laying the framework to begin creating the RFP in the next 30 to 60 days? How are we laying the framework? So we've read the book. And from those internal discussions, we have really formed 2 work groups. And so we have work group number 1, which will really help frame up the housing needs assessment. So the primary task includes creating a scope of work to conduct a housing needs assessment and to identify gaps or needs for addressing housing issues. So really compiling what information and data do we have to start with a baseline of understanding what are our housing needs at every level of income. And that includes supportive and permanent housing needs. Secondly, KHC aims to create an RFP for a housing gap assessment and projection. So again, engaging a consultant that can help with the needs, set the goals, talk about the methodology, and help us really complete the work over a period of time. Then we have a second group, which is the policy work group. And so again, this group aims to take a deep dive into existing and new policies to encourage robust and alternative technologies to increase housing supply units. And then continue to help KHC facilitate lead discussions with developers and partners for feedback across minimum and universal design plans and program guidelines, which we've done in recent months, a lot of discussions, especially with our Eastern Kentucky partners. This is really just an image that illustrates the Washington housing need. They came up with this image from their findings, and it really projects the housing needs for the next 20 years, so through to 2044. Again, this plan, they actually released their RFP in August, September of 2021. They are working with consultants, Burke Consulting and Cloudburst Consulting as a sub-consultant. And so these contractors have continued the work. They started around January of 2022 after winning that 21 RFP, and they have continued work. So I know in the next few weeks, their final findings will be released. But this is kind of an update of what they are showing as of right now for the projections. So I wanted to make sure that everyone had this. But again, what they did with their housing needs assessment, I thought this was interesting. At the start of this RFP, and really laying the groundwork and planning, their consultant group released what was called a housing survey. And so they did that in December 22. It was a 12-county survey conducted by the Commerce. And the majority of respondents in every county wanted to see more housing, to see more diverse housing and more affordability. So again, it just shows that the onset of this project really was to address the common issues that we are experiencing. And what happened in Washington was in 2021, their legislation actually changed the way communities are required to plan for housing. And so within their House Bill 1220, they amended what was called the Growth Management Act. And it instructed local governments to plan for and accommodate housing to all income levels. And so this significantly strengthened their previous goal, which was to encourage affordable housing. Well, now the Department of Commerce was charged with actually planning at every level and working with a 15-person advisory committee and focus group, alongside with emergency housing providers across the state to actually develop a methodology. And from that legislation, they engaged consultants to conduct a housing needs assessment. So again, the goal of all of this is really to show you, the process that we are taking and really starting with having internal and external conversations, and then really kind of bridging and asking much deeper questions. Things like, how can our existing programs and funds increase the supply? How can we go about identifying gaps, and how can we use this as a framework to really help with the investment and development, economic development across our state? So we want to create tangible tools for counties, cities, and like Patrick said, bringing employers and economic development partners to the table, but providing a tangible tool to help drive our housing plans. And so, Bev, if there are questions, I'm open to that, but this concludes this part of the agenda.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Kay?
Kay, it's Patrick Bowen. Question one, the housing needs assessment, is that limited to homelessness, or were you saying that's really you're looking at affordable housing, period?
We're looking at affordable housing, period. Okay. Yes. And so we hope to, yes. Go ahead with your question.
I was just going to add, and you and I can chat through emails, but so I'm the vice chair of the National Council of Housing Market Analysts, and that organization oversees the market study industry. And so we set standards for different types of studies, methodologies, terminologies. One thing we don't have is guidelines for housing needs assessments. However, I am commissioned by the organization to write a white paper on content and approaches for housing needs assessments. So if you want to loop me in, I'll leave it up to you the level of engagement, but I'm all in if you want me to at least get on phone calls or go to meetings or whatever to talk about what we've learned and things we think are good practices, and not just what I do or what I think the organization ultimately will agree that's the right practices. But I could also share with you examples of things I've seen in other, whether like region-wide or statewide studies. good work and also bad work. And I can give you examples of other states that have commissioned, maybe you all have looked at those things, but I can give you examples of other states and what they've done, their state finance agencies, in terms of statewide housing needs assessments. We've written a couple. So anyway, I'm a good resource to whatever extent you want to take advantage of that, but I would be glad to help you all kind of formulate what would a housing needs assessment look like? What are the resources available? What's reasonable, and what is maybe not reasonable to ask, and realize it's going to impact your budget, because some folks get excited and have a great wish list, and sometimes it adds so much to your cost. And I can at least share with you, hey, if you ask for that, you better expect a major jump in your budget, and those kind of things. Insights that I know because I'm bidding on jobs or I've seen bids. So anyway, I just want to share that with you, to use me as a resource if you would like.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. And as you were actually presenting today, talking about housing needs, I was kind of leaning in a little more because I was thinking and listening to the expertise you had in that area. Yeah. We're still, early in our conversations and engaging with the Department of Commerce there in Washington. And so that's why for the committee and those listening on the call, we wanted to share the tools and materials that we are currently looking at and hoping to mirror. Again, over the next 30 days, we're hoping to engage in those conversations a little deeper, be able to talk more about our goals and our objectives for the RFP as we look and open an RFP up for consultants to be able to come in and assist. And those goals, again, understanding what are the needs at the county level throughout our state, looking at, evaluating land capacity and what is availability look like, but then also tying in, racial factors, racial impacts as well, and inequities that we can address also through a housing plan and housing needs assessment, if that makes sense. So we're looking currently at that Housing for All planning tool that has been released by Washington State Department of Commerce Growth Management. That's what we're looking at now. And so as those conversations take place, we'll certainly loop you in, keep this committee updated on our progress. So thank you for that comment, Patrick.
Yep.
Anything else? All right. Actually, Kay, I'm thinking I'd like to flip items 10 and 11 and maybe talking about suggestions for agenda topics for the next meeting. One thought I had through this presentation was that it really feels like that 4-year plan that the Work Ready Communities is working on, like it's just a golden opportunity to weigh in on that and to have that be a piece of that plan. And so whether, I'm realizing we're an advisory committee to Kentucky Housing Corporation. So I think I want to throw out that perhaps to make a motion that this committee encourage or ask that the committee that you have for the homelessness as a housing program, housing problem, like that group, it looks like that's KHC staff that are looking at that issue.
Yes.
And so that if they could either weigh in on that plan, or if our committee members could be invited to join KHC staff, but that we, formally weigh in on that plan.
Okay.
So I want to throw that out to the group just to get some feedback or thoughts on that.
I can certainly, this is Debbie Dennison with the State Workforce Board. I think I'm the one that mentioned the state plan that will be due. And so I can work with Kay on whatever you all decide. I guess, let me put it that way.
Is there opposition to this, or are people, I mean, I know sometimes the energy level is hard, especially in the summer.
I would like to hear more, so I would be interested.
Okay, Phyllis. Anybody else? So if there's no opposition to that, then, Kay, if you could carry that forward to the Homelessness is a Housing Problem Committee that's working on the policy issues, and could you ask them to take that up, to follow through on that?
Okay. Yeah, and you're referring to the work group, the policy work group, just making sure that there's representation with the 4-year plan that KWIB, that Debbie just spoke with. And I do actually attend KWIB meetings already. It's part of my job description. So,
okay,
so
that's good.
And see Debbie. So yes, I will, circle back to the policy group to see if there could be additional attendance and participation. And I believe Phyllis Parker just spoke up and mentioned she'd like more information as well. So I will follow up with Phyllis after the call also.
Okay, and if anyone else would, you could also let Kay know that.
Hi, this is Lona Brewer. Our office will be getting a substantial amount of money for contractor training. So I would definitely like to be kept involved in the process. Kay, just keep me apprised, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
You.
Are there any other suggestions for agenda topics for the next meeting? All right, Kay and I will work on that. Are there any informational items or announcements? All right, then.
Conference is coming up in August.
I'm sorry, what is that?
The KEC conference that's coming up in August to be announced.
Okay, do you know those dates, Kay?
Yeah, it's August 24th and 25th. I can put the link again in the chat for those that want to register.
Okay,
Absolutely.
And there's still time to register?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And there will be a breakout of the sessions and the topics and who's speaking. It will be in Lexington as well.
All right. With that, if there's no objection, we will adjourn. The next meeting is October 24th. And will that be in person, Kay?
Yes, it will be in person here at KHC campus.
All right. So see everyone in a couple of months. It'll be cool maybe by then.
It'll be cool. See y'all soon.
Bye.
Bye.